So in the meantime, let me English literature. Can you all see my screen?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Okay, let's give everybody about a minute more so more people can join in, and then we'll get started. So while we're waiting for others to join, just a request, this is a repeated request, but then I'm repeating it only because it still keeps happening. Don't unmute yourself. I understand sometimes you don't realize that you have unmuted your phone or your laptop or whichever device you're using. Just be cognizant of what you're doing, and then just check once in a while if you're muted or unmuted. And yeah, the expectation is you unmute only when you have a question or you have something to say. Okay. At all other times, please mute yourself. From my side, I'm going to mute everybody, and then I'm going to unmute when we have the questions and answer session. But if you have anything to share with everybody, feel free to type it in the chat box, and then I'll be sure to unmute you. Okay. Is that okay? Can you all hear me, or did I lose you?
We can hear you, sir.
Okay, all right.
We'll just start using the chat window going forward, and probably all will stay on mute.
Okay, let's go ahead and then get started. It's about 3:12, so we're already late by a few minutes. So let me quickly maximize this. All right, there we are. Okay, good afternoon again, everybody. Welcome to the online video lectures organized by Dr. B.R. Ambedkar Open University. This class is for MA English second year students. This is course 9, which is titled Indian English Literature. This course is divided into 4 blocks and 20 units. We have discussed units 1 through 4, which are part of block 1 in the previous classes, in the past 3 classes. Today, we will discuss block 1, unit 5, titled Rajarao's Kantapura. We will talk about the novel, and then we'll talk about the major themes, and then we'll have a discussion around the book. And if time permits, we will start with block 3. You'll have to note that we're not starting block 2. We'll start with block 3, the Indian novel. Unit 10, the Indian novel of 1950s to 1980s. Like we discussed yesterday, we will go to block 2 after block 3. As we have been discussing prose in block 1, it makes sense for us, for continuity's sake, we do that. We do block 3 first, which deals with novels, and then we'll go to block 2 for poetry, and then we'll do block 4, which deals with poetry and drama. I know yesterday Dr. Madhuri had asked at the starting of the class for somebody to give us a recap of what we have learned so far. Do I have any volunteers who can do that? Or it doesn't have to be an elaborate thing. It can just be about a minute. What have we learned in unit 1, 2, 3, and 4 so far? Anybody who can tell us? I'm seeing some new names, so we know that we have some new people joining in today. So for the benefit of them, if somebody can list on a high level what we have learned so far, that'll be great. Okay, that's okay. I'm going to, I don't see anything on the chat box. So let me go ahead and then do that. Okay. We've started with unit 1, in which we talked about how English has arrived in India. We talked a little bit about East India Company, and then how we didn't have any other choice except learning English. And we had a discussion surrounding that point. We've talked about the early writers in units 2 and 3. We've talked about the trio, Narayan, Rajarao, and Mulk Raj Anand. Even though your course focuses majorly on Narayan and Rajarao. In unit 4, yesterday we talked about Narayan's novel, The Dark Room. And today we are going to talk about Kantapura, written by Rajarao. Okay. So let me try and figure out how to move. Okay, there. Right. We'll follow the same structure that we followed for Narayan. I know some of this it might be a repetition from yesterday, because I know BV gave us a very good introduction from the author, but this is just a very quick recap of who Rajarao is and then what Kantapura is. Okay. So Rajarao was born in 1908 in Mysore into a Kannada speaking family. His mother died when he was very young. He was only 4 when he lost his mother. And this particular incident, it was very traumatic. And as you can imagine, it's very traumatic, and it left a lasting impression on him, not only personally, but as a novelist also. Why do we say that? Because orphanhood and absence of mother are recurring themes in his works, if you notice. So later he studied at the Nizam College in Hyderabad, and then later graduated from the University of Madras. Then he moved to France and studied French there. He studied the language and the literature of France. And later he worked in the University of Texas in US as a professor of philosophy. And he remained in the US for the rest of his life. He died in July 2006 at the age of 97. And just like Narayan, he's won many awards like the Sahitya Academy Award, the Padma Vibhushan, and the Padma Bhushan. Okay. Here on the screen, you have the writings of Rajarao. As you can see, his writings majorly are on the fiction side, but he also has some non-fiction works that he has written. I'll just leave it on the screen for you to just go through the titles for a second. Okay, now let's go and discuss, go ahead and then discuss Rajarao's novel Kantapura. Okay, this novel was published in 1938, and it deals with a small village, a South Indian village called Kantapura. Okay, hold on for 1 sec. Somebody is, okay. Okay, sorry, there was a chat. Where were we? Okay, 1938, and then it deals with the life of people in a very small South Indian village called Kantapura. Okay, DV again, as we know, has volunteered to give us a very quick summary of the plot. DV, are you ready? Can you do that now? Okay, I'll have to unmute you for that, right? Okay, hold on for a second, DV.
All right, coming down to the plot of this novel. This plot is set in a village called Kantapura, where it starts where a person finds the idol of Lord Shiva, and he goes ahead and places it and starts religious discourse in the literary sense. In the normal sense, you could say that he just goes ahead and sets up the idol and starts making arrangements for the deity or the god or the lord in whichever form or whatever way people would do it. And people take wind of that, and within the temple, or taking that as a platform, he goes ahead and starts propagating the views, the ideologies of Mahatma Gandhi and what's happening in the country, just to raise general awareness. These are times where you didn't have television, or you didn't have a mode of communication which is sophisticated enough that the word of Mahatma Gandhi could reach everywhere. You had some learned people within who could go ahead and uh, propagate that word. So this happens. There is another setup which is being discussed within the novel where you have a British tea estate, coffee estate within this region where Coorg and Karnataka geographically are very ideal climates for the production of coffee. So there are workers called here, laborers called here who work. There is a toddy shop and there is a setup where these workers are made to work with wages, and the toddy shop in the evening encapsulates these people, and in view of alcohol or intoxicating beverages takes off their money, is how it's being depicted by the author here. And you have a certain caste references within the story. There is a Chaka who is trying to be the narrator of this story, how things happen, what happens. And we've got Murthy as a character who is instrumental in spreading Gandhi's ideology and making awareness, generating awareness in the masses. You have got lower caste, higher caste people denoted by the author, and what happens within the story, how it progresses, how the police action happens, how any kind of slogan shouting or practice of ahimsa or Gandhian ideology is curbed by the British, what techniques or what methods they employ, and how everyone leaves Kantapura, runs out of there, and then there is another scene set up where they return back. So this is again a fragmented description of the plot. So that's that time is a constraint. Just want to run quick through it. I have got a Word document which I'd wish to share with all of you. It's a 3-page document which gives a little more informative summary of the story, keeping the story aspect in mind, other than the literary aspects or the other aspects which we study for Kantapura. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, DV, for that quick summary. Okay, so Kantapura, like DV said, it is about a village called Kantapura. It is a South Indian small village setting in which Rajarao is writing, right? And then the time period is early 1930s, where there was a civil disobedience movement. There was a salt satyagraha, and that's the time period when this whole novel is set. Okay, you all can still hear me, right? There's a pop-up that says I'm mute, but I'm not. Okay, all right. So the central concern of this novel is the participation of this small South Indian village in the national struggle called by Mahatma Gandhi. Okay, so Mahatma Gandhi plays, or not directly, but then his ideals and his principles and quote unquote Gandhianism plays a major role in this novel. Okay, it is depicted through the main protagonist, whose name is Murthy, but Gandhi ji plays indirectly he plays a very pivotal role in this particular novel. Now, though the village Kantapura is reflective of the caste system, right? DV kind of alluded to it in his summary. It is reflective of the caste system because at the starting itself, Rajarao says the village has Brahmin quarters, Shudra quarters, and then the Paraya quarters, right? So it's completely bifurcated into these 3 quarters, and there's no intermingling at the starting, right? So everybody has to be in their quarters and then do their social responsibilities. Even though this is there in the background, everyone in the village work with each other according to their social roles of that time, and they all contribute to social harmony. So it's not like there are these 3 quarters and then everybody's fighting with each other. That's not how it's portrayed. So it's portrayed is that the society is in harmony in this, or there's a social harmony in this village. Rajarao describes that everybody is involved in the festivities. He names some Hindu festivals, excuse me, and the celebrations of the village. The protagonist Murthy, who is a very important character in this novel, was instrumental in raising an awareness, like I said, of Gandhian ideals in the village and awakening of the people for national struggle for Indian independence. Like DV said, these are the times that we are talking about. The times that we are talking about are the times when they didn't have TVs, they didn't have internet, they didn't have, this is not the time where information was being passed at rapid speed. This was the time when they depended on letters, telegrams, and that kind of stuff, right? So information was not, or the propagation of information was not as fast as we see today. So you'll have, when you read this novel, or when you discuss about this novel, you'll always have to put yourself in that time period. Okay. So Murthy was instrumental in raising an awareness of the Gandhian ideals, like I said, for the villagers. And then he kind of caused an awakening of the people for the national struggle and the call of Gandhi for national struggle and Indian independence. So with concepts like the self-reliance we talked about, or Swadeshi, right, where the villagers they welcome the spinning of khadi clothes and wearing them. They at one point in the novel, they understand that the very clothes that they are wearing are actually generating revenue for the Britishers. So they understand how the Britishers are actually exploiting these villagers or exploiting Indians, and the very clothes that we wear are actually revenue generating for the Britishers. So from Murthy's talking about Gandhian ideals and everything, the villagers welcome the spinning of khadi clothes and then wearing them. And then Murthy also makes them aware of Gandhian ideals of truth, non-violence, and self-governance. And Rajarao actually tells us how a small village was empowered to participate in the struggle for Indian independence. When we say Indian independence, we only talk about these prominent figures. We only talk about these big politicians or freedom fighters. But then Rajarao here is basically telling us how a small village was empowered. How did information flow into that village? How did the villagers' attitude towards Indian freedom struggle change? These are the things that Rajarao is actually telling us. Now, a couple of days ago, I think somebody asked what, because I mentioned the word Swadeshi, somebody asked what Swadeshi meant when we were discussing, I think, Gandhi's Hind Swaraj. I'm sorry, I don't remember who asked it, but as you can see, if you're still in the class, as you can see, here in Kantapura, the villagers learned about the ways in which, like I said, Britishers are exploiting Indians, and realized that, like I said, even the clothes that Indians wore were revenue generating for the Britishers. So what they did is they started making their own clothes and wearing them. So this is a separate kind of alternative economy that they have created. We'll talk about that point in a little while, but the point is they became self-reliant. This is what Mahatma Gandhi meant when he talks about Swadeshi. He calls for cutting all trade ties with the British and becoming self-reliant. So he says, forget about doing business with the British. We can do business with ourselves. So that was his whole point about khadi and not wearing foreign bought or Britishers or clothes that were produced by exploitation of the Britishers. Now we can consider this novel as a socio-political novel of the Gandhian struggle for freedom. Right? Rajarao has focused on the, like I said, early part of the 1930s when that salt satyagraha time. Now, even though people of Kantapura were reluctant at first, now change is very, very hard to come, especially when you're talking about smaller villages and rural areas of India. These villages and rural areas of India have been living the same way for decades and even centuries, some of them. Right? So change is very hard to come by. So people of Kantapura were very reluctant at first. But with the help of information of what is going on at the national level that Murthy brought into the village, and then he explained them, they became supporters of the Gandhian ideals. So the novel doesn't only touch on the political aspect of the freedom struggle, but it also touches on how it impacted the rural population of India, and then how they reacted to what is going on at a larger scale. Like I said, the change is extremely slow because of the time it took for passing of information from one place to another, but it did happen. Now, another point is that Rajarao has not attempted to showcase or romanticize the Indian society. We've talked about this when we were talking about the trio a couple of days ago. They didn't try to romanticize the Indian society. They never said Indian society is the perfect society. The Britishers are the evil and then we are perfect. So the Indian society as it was at that time was not a replacement for the British society, right? If you remember Gandhi in what point does it make if what's the point if Britishers leave and then Indians still live like Britishers? What's the point? If we live in the same ways, it's not going to make any difference. So that's what he says, right? So I'm sorry, there's another pop-up. Let me just get rid of it quickly. Yeah. So Rajarao here realistically portrayed how a typical Indian village is in the 1930s. He did not portray an ideal Indian society. Okay, and then he never called the Indian society at that time as an ideal society also. For example, if you look at the character of Bhatta, I don't think we touched on it, but I'm hopeful that that character will come up in the three-page summary that is going to send to you. But this Bhatta, this guy is a wealthy landlord, is a wealthy businessman in this novel. And if you look at this character of Bhatta, who is a businessman in Kantapura, while he acts very friendly and appears generous to the villagers, he acts as if is the most generous businessman in the world. Who borrows money, whoever the villagers who borrow money from him, he actually charges them very high interest rates and basically manipulates them for his own financial gain, right? So this is an inherent flaw of the Indian society at that time. Rajarao highlights this. Rajarao doesn't cover this up and then says India is the best, Indian society is the best, or anything of that sort. He actually highlights these things through his characters. And this guy Bhatta also opposes Murthy in establishing the Congress Party office, if you read the novel. So, like I said, Rajarao is also talking about the inequalities and the flaws in the Indian society. He doesn't make Indian society look like something that has no flaws. Okay, now let us discuss the main themes of this novel. Okay, I'll list some of the themes which are not there in your course book. So if you can make some notes, then that's great. That will be a good addition to your answer. If a question from this unit comes up in your examination, that would be a good addition. We will get to the themes that are listed in your course book in a few minutes. But let me start with other themes. Okay. Of course, like I said, the main theme is portraying the evils of colonialism and the colonial rule in India, and then the awareness, raising awareness for the freedom struggle. And through the main character, Murthy, the writer talks about the issues concerning the colonial rule and how Gandhian idea of Swaraj is the way to go. Swaraj is again self-rule, home rule. So Gandhianism also forms a major theme of the novel, like I mentioned a few minutes ago. Another theme in this novel is about the caste system. This is apparent right from the starting of the novel, where the writer, like I said, describes the village. I think he says like 24 houses or 27 houses or something of that sort. And then they are divided into these three quarters: Brahmin quarters, Sudra quarters, and then Paraya quarters, right? Murthy, our protagonist, at one point goes against the system. He says, no, I mean, he himself is a high-class Brahmin, but he says, no, this does not make any sense. And then again, you'll have to remember that he's influenced by the ideas of Mahatma Gandhi. So yeah, at one point he goes against the caste system and then he starts teaching the pariahs. And Murthy says basically at one point that there has to be unity irrespective of the caste, or else the larger nationalist struggle would not succeed. The Gandhian ideals would not be met if we as Indians are separated into groups based on caste and creed and that kind of stuff. That kind of classification is not going to be helpful. So another theme we have to note, which I think majority of the discussions is kind of goes unnoticed, or it's not talked about when it comes to Kantapura, because when you talk about Kantapura, the character of Murthy, the character of the other characters, the protagonist, right? There's, even though Murthy is the main protagonist, there are other pivotal roles in that novel. They come up, and then there's a lot of discussion about Gandhianism, there's a lot of discussion about freedom struggle and everything. But very often we forget about the women's roles that were depicted in this novel. Rajarao has done an excellent work in doing or highlighting how women have or they have a crucial role when it comes to the nationalist struggle. These women of Kantapura march, they protest, they observe non-violence and ahimsa, they boycott, they read the newspapers, they do all these things. When somebody says a small South Indian village somewhere, nobody thinks that women are, or they can form a pivotal part of nationalist struggle, right? But in this novel, this is completely a contrast to the typical role attributed to women. Like, for example, there is this character Rangama, the widow who works with Murthy in educating the people of village. She has a pivotal role to play in the awakening of people. She helps Murthy in teaching the parayas, and then she plays a very pivotal role. So this is one thing that you'll have to notice and then think about, how Rajarao has highlighted the women's role in this whole novel. Now, another theme that we kind of tangentially touched is that of the community. Right from the starting, where villagers lived in harmony, like I mentioned, right? They celebrated all the festivals and all together. Right from there until the end of the novel, where Murthy and the villagers are looking to the future and planning to continue their fight for independence until that scene. The sense of community and togetherness is recurrent in this novel. It's completely recurrent. You can see it in multiple places. Okay, now having said that, now let us look at the sections from your course book. Now, I'm hoping that everybody has their course book in front of them. If you don't have it, you can again jot whatever I'm talking about quickly, the section names and the section numbers, and go home and whenever you have access to your book, please go ahead and then read the sections for better understanding. So from the course book, section 5.2, it talks about myth, history, and language in Kantapura. That's the title. But Rajarao describes basically what he does is he describes the present, or this section talks about how the author describes the present in terms of the past, usually in terms of mythic past of India. Okay. Excuse me. Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm back. So like I was saying, he uses the mythic past of India, or the myths and the history of India to talk about present in terms of the past. For example, and again, I'll quote from the novel here. Somebody says, like Harishchandra before has finished his vow, the gods will come down and dissolve his vow, and the Britishers will leave India, and we shall be free, and we shall pay less taxes, and there will be no policemen. So if you look at it, Rajarao is actually using the story of Harishchandra, and then he's comparing Harishchandra, and then he says, just like his vows were finished, the vow of Gandhiji will also get finished. The Britishers will leave India, we shall be free, and we shall pay less taxes. And so here Rajarao is linking the anti-colonial struggle with the religious and mythic history. So, and again, that is a recurrent theme. I think yesterday also somebody had a question about myths and then how Rajarao uses. So Rajarao, as well as Narayan, I think in his Maneater of Malgudi, he touches upon myths also. So you can read that too. Okay, another point which we discussed in Unit 3 actually is the use of English language to express Indian expressions. This is something that is extremely interesting, and it's very interesting what Rajarao does here. He uses the English language to express Indian expressions, mannerisms, and idioms. Okay. Both Narayan and Rajarao have tweaked British English for their purposes, and basically they Indianized English. We talked about this a couple of days ago. They Indianized English with the usages like I think I mentioned corner house Murthy or coffee planter Venkat Narayana. So why would he talk about corner house Murthy, or why would he talk about coffee planter Venkat Narayana? These are usages that are not common in the West. These are usages that are kind of sort of neologisms. They are pretty new. They're new kind of usages that Rajarao has introduced here. Or even the culturally specific ceremonies, right? Like a blessing ceremony, or like hair cutting ceremony, or rice eating ceremony, etc. He talks about these things. Now, for a Western reader, if you go in and tell him hair cutting ceremony, that doesn't make any sense to him or her, because hair cutting is hair cutting. That's all, right? But from a cultural perspective, from an Indian cultural perspective, hair cutting ceremony or the Mundan ceremony that they do, these are very important things. Right, and Rajarao doesn't try to, get rid of these expressions. He puts them directly in English, even though he's writing in English. He doesn't try to hide these things. He directly puts them into English. Okay. In fact, I don't know if you know this person, GJV Prasad. In his paper, he wrote a paper, not specific to Rajarao's Kantapura, but he touches on this novel there. The paper is titled "Writing Translation: A Strange Case of the Indian English Novel." It's a very interesting paper. If you people have time, please go through that particular essay and the article. It's an extremely interesting article. He talks about Rajarao, he talks about how Rushdie, and then he talks about how these people have used the language and then how they've tweaked the language for their purposes. Okay. Now, GJV Prasad, he says, I have the quote somewhere. Hold on for a sec. Right there. So GJV Prasad says it must be noted that Rajarao does not claim to be writing in Indian English. He is not writing in British English either. He is creating a language as well as creating in it. See how beautifully it's put. He basically says he's not writing in Indian English, whatever that Indian English is. He's not writing in British English either, because whatever that British English is, he is actually creating a new language. He's actually creating a new language as well as he is creating works in it. So Rajarao tries to retain the local speech rhythms and idioms and culturally specific items in his English. Now, I'm sure you can relate to this. Now, you probably already know the tone, intonation of every language is different. And then if you can do this exercise by yourself. Think of a phrase or a sentence in your own mother tongue and say it. Okay. And then think about the same kind of expression in English. Are you going to say it the same way? No, you're not going to say it the same way. But when I mean same way, are you going to use the same tone, same intonation, the same force? You're not going to do that. It's going to be different. So every language has its own rhythm, right? Quote unquote, local speech rhythms are there for every language. What Rajarao does here is, which I think is very interesting, is he tries to retain the local speech rhythms. So what I mean by that is, when we read Kantapura, we feel like a Kannadiga is talking when Venkama is talking. So she's talking in English, actually. The dialogues are in English. Everything that she says is in English, but then we immediately relate it, and then we think, oh, this is a Kannadiga talking, right? So he tries to retain those local speech rhythms, which is extremely important and for his novel, and extremely difficult also. So that is why GJV Prasad says, he's not writing in Indian English, he's not writing in British English, he's actually creating a language. So that's one very important thing that Rajarao does when it comes to using language. Then section 5.3, I think it's on page 33. It discusses Gandhianism, and the moral economy of Kantapura. I mentioned this moral account or alternate economy a few minutes ago. This section states that, or it starts with Gandhiji's principle that self-transformation is the key to Swaraj. Okay, what does this mean? Self-transformation is you will have to transform yourself first. You'll have to make yourself better. And that is how you will achieve Swaraj. First, so basically it says change should happen at home first and then later outside, right? We've all heard about that. So you change yourself and then the country will change. You be the change that you want to see, okay? So, and then this is reflected in Murthy's character again. Murthy accepts this particular premise that that Gandhi says and transforms himself by getting rid of his prejudices about caste and religion. Like I said, he's from a Brahmin family, and then he goes into a pariah's home, right? So he breaks those barriers, he breaks those walls, and then he changes himself. And then according to Gandhi's principles, that self-transformation is the key to Swaraj. The novel also brings the difficulties in self-transformation. Now, self-transformation is not something that is very easy, and then not everybody can do it, first thing. And the second thing is, even the people who can do it cannot do it overnight. It's not something that is done. I mean, it's not done something, it's not something that can be done easily, right? For example, again, going back to this character Venkama, right? She finds it really difficult to accept Gandhi's insistence on equality. In fact, your book actually talks about her, what she says. Let me quickly see where that is. So on page 34, at the starting of the page, she says, "What is Gandhi business? Nothing but weaving coarse handmade cloth, not fit for a mop, and bellowing out bhajans and mixing with the pariahs," right? So you see how reluctant she is to actually trust Gandhi's principles, or how reluctant she is to get into the or break the barriers or break the walls that we talked about. She is so set in her own ways, so to speak. Okay, and it's very difficult for her to, in fact, it is unacceptable for her to actually go into a pariah's place or break these barriers. Self-transformation is very difficult for a lot of people. And but the character Murthy, again, the contrast is in the characters Murthy and Venkama. Murthy, he could do it, and Venkama just couldn't. Now, before we move on to the moral economy of Gandhiism, Gandhianism, right? Whatever we put it. I just want to quickly do a check. Is everybody able to hear me? You can type it in the chat box. I just want to make sure that I'm not just talking to the computer. Okay, thank you, Sirisha. Okay, let's move on to the moral economy of. Yes, Samir, 1 second. I'll unmute you so that you can talk. Samir, can you unmute yourself?
Yes, sir.
Yes, Samir. Did you want to say something?
Yeah. Like the previous chapters, whatever you have completed, so those are available on YouTube, right?
Yes, they are all available on YouTube. I think DV mentioned in the previous class that he has already sent the links. He's shared them in your WhatsApp group or whatever group he was talking about. Get in contact with him, and then you can also search on, I think, DRAOU -live LIVE 1919. Okay, if you search on that, there'll be a channel that will come up. All the classes for MA English second year that are currently going on would be available. These are live streamed, but you can also watch them later at your convenience. Okay, so don't worry if you have missed some classes. That's actually okay. You can go back and watch them.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Yeah, sure. Okay, now let's go on to the moral economy that is described in section 5.3 of your book. Okay. Now this section talks about the critic Anshuman Mondal, who argues that Gandhianism in the novel functions as an alternative economic model. Like I think I mentioned this a few minutes earlier, but how does this become an alternative economic model? Because like I said, the production of khadi replaces the colonial goods and then becomes an alternate economy. Okay, they are basically trying to shut down the British economy in that village, and then they are trying to create an alternate economy which is dependent on the local resources, and then the usage is also local. Okay, that's the intention. So Anshuman Mondal says this is the kind of, it acts as a kind of an alternative economic model. Now this alternate economy is a moral one. He says it's a moral one. How is it moral? I mean, how can an economy be moral? So what he says is it is a moral one and just because it serves the nation and the freedom struggle and not individuals. It's not a capitalistic view of the economy where individuals are or great big corporations are getting benefited. It serves the nation, which is, again, we talked about what a nation is, and then the sense of nationalism and community. When it comes to talking about nationalism, it is serving the nation and the freedom struggle and not the individuals. Also, it does not work on exploitation. The British is, nobody is exploiting anybody. Unlike the colonial economy, it is not based on exploitation. In addition, he says Gandhianism is a powerful weapon because it is about self-reliance, and it's thus not dependent on the colonial masters. You're not actually depending on somebody. You're trying to be self-reliant. So it's a very powerful weapon. Sorry. But if you really think about it, right, does the novel really follow this principle of moral economy? You'll have to think about it. I'll give you a hint. For example, the character of Bhatta we were talking about, right, who is a wealthy landlord and then who charges extra interest from the people. Do you think he's following this moral principle? Because his business is exploitative, to say the least, right? He's exploiting his own people. So, so do you think this argument holds? You can type a yes or a no in the chat box. Right. Yeah. Yep. No model principle followed is what DV is saying. Anybody else? Anybody says that? Anybody who agrees with this? Anybody who says, yes, this is moral principle. Bhatta is a moral person. It is okay to exploit his own people. Okay, good. Thank you, DV and Sirisha, for your responses. And so what is Rajarao doing here? Rajarao is showing us that the villages have their share of exploitative relations and this economic injustice, right? He's not saying this is a perfect village. Again, like going back to our previous point, this is not a perfect ideal situation. They have their own economic injustice, which is built into the system. So this is, again, he's basically showing us the reality. He's showing the social, he's using the technique of social realism, like we talked about. Now, last section of this unit deals with the concepts of nation and nationalism in Kantapura. We have discussed about nation and nationalism in the previous sections and previous sessions also. But basically, a gist of this is basically what it says is individual differences are secondary. What is primary when you talk about is nationalism is the greater idea of the nation. Forget about your individual differences. The individual differences are anyway there, right? We as a community, again, we are not one whole cohesive community as India, right? Even though that's probably the ideal way, but we are not. We have smaller communities which always have differences. But when we talk about nationalism, all those differences are secondary. What is primary? The primary thing is greater idea of the nation. It's Indians, right? Indianness. The very idea of a nation, like I said, is supposed to be on a unified and a shared cultural heritage. Now, so differences are erased in favor of a single concept of identity. Like I said, we are Indians. We are not Tamilians, Kannadigas, Hindus, Muslims, Christians. We're not those. We are Indians, right? So that's where that's the point. Now, this is homogenization, right? You're basically homogenizing everything and then forming a cohesive single unity. This is where people do not focus on the differences and then they seek one identity, like I said, being Indian and not other classifications. Now here Rajarao shows that on one hand, unity even in smaller parts of India, like the village of Kantapura, is working towards independence. And on the other hand, the local differences basically get erased because the focus is on unity the local differences get erased. No, I think that's the end of the chapter, but then I jotted down a couple of more points. Let me see. Yes, that's the end of the chapter for you. And then the section 5.6 talks about summing up. But a couple of more points. Let's talk about a couple of more points before we wrap up this unit. Okay. There are some symbols that Rajarao uses in this novel. This novel, I mean, I think you should all take some time to, maybe even after exams or someday that you have time, read the novel. It's a very interesting novel. You can reread it. It's been a long time since I read it, but I would definitely want to reread it when I have time. It's a very interesting usage of language, like I said, and then it's humorous at some places. Some characters like Venkama, they are very typical grandmother characters, and then you'll have a smile on your face when they talk. So anyway, so these symbols, so there are a lot of symbols, but then let's just look at two of them, just so that you can, if you can integrate them into your answers for the exam. Okay. There is a Skeffington Gate. There is a Skeffington place where the coolies go in and then they work inside the Skeffington Palace, and it's a powerful symbol of division of power, right? There's Skeffington Gate. On one side of the gate, it's this poverty-ridden, quote-unquote backward Indians, right? And the other side of the gate is the powerful British colonial master, right? So it's a division of the foreign rule and then the self-rule. You can talk about it in that way also. Okay. And then its power is actually in the text is when coolies walk inside it, and the maestri, right, or their supervisor, he bangs the gate behind him, and they all walked up, and then the novel says they cease to have any independence. Okay, so the minute they cross that gate, they've ceased to have any independence. So this is a powerful symbol, the Skeffington Gate. And another symbol is crossing the threshold. We kind of sort of, again, tangentially touched upon this when we talked about the character of Murthy. Now, crossing the threshold is basically crossing your, I'm not sure if everybody knows what a threshold is. It's the border or the boundary of your home, right? When you cross, at least in the Hindu home, you have the main door, and then you have that little strip of wood or whatever at the bottom, right? So you're crossing that. That's the threshold, right? The crossing of threshold itself is a powerful symbol that Rajarao uses. Murthy crosses the threshold of his house and the house of a pariah also. So, like I said, he gets rid of his biases and prejudices, and then he goes to the house of a pariah. So he actually is crossing the threshold. This is not just going from one home to another home. This is a symbolic way because it's again, like I said, it's not crossing your own home's threshold and going into somebody else's home. It's not that, but he's actually crossing the borders of a typical Hindu structure where a Brahmin is not allowed to go into a pariah's home, right? A Brahmin can never even go anywhere near a pariah's home. But symbolically, Murthy is actually going and breaking that powerful wall, and then he's crossing the threshold. So that's another symbol. There are a lot of other symbols, and there's a lot of information. You can, I don't think the course book talks about them, but you can Google, and then I'm sure there's tons of secondary material that's available. Okay. The time is about 4, so we have about half an hour more. So let us now quickly look at very quickly look at how to answer the questions from this unit. Okay, I'm going to very quickly, where's the book? Okay. So one of the possible questions from the sample examination questions section of this unit that's given at the end of the unit is, how does Rajarao make use of the English language and the English literary form in Indian way? Now, when they say English literary form, they're talking about the British novel form in the Indian way. This is again straightforward. We have talked about this at length in this particular session. Answer to this question is directly on page 33 of your course book. Okay, you can start by, when you're writing this answer, you can start by talking about how Rajarao Indianizes English, and then how he Indianizes or how he anglicizes the Indian expressions. And then give some examples of how he deals with character names, like we talked corner house Murthy, and that's a special usage. Or you can talk about, give some examples of colloquial expressions. At one point he says ayo, ayo, right? Now for a Western reader, that just doesn't make any sense. What is ayo, ayo, right? It doesn't make any sense. But Rajarao deliberately doesn't translate it, or he does not replace it with something that is that the Western user or a Western reader can understand. So he uses this. You can give these examples, and then how he converts the syntax of English to accommodate Indian expressions and mannerism, right? Sometimes when Venkama is talking or somebody is talking, the grammar or the syntax of those English expressions or English sentences are a little weird, right? You wouldn't talk like that in everyday English language. They are reflective, like I said, they follow the local speech rhythms of Kannada. So it's like Venkama is actually talking in Kannada, not English. So you can include all these things in the answer. And again, I've repeated this multiple times before. Please please let your answer be contextual. Don't put in extra irrelevant information. Extra information is always welcome depending on the time you get, but don't put irrelevant information, because that is just not going to give you a good answer. Okay, so look at the question and then be very contextual. Look at what the question is asking and then be very, very focused and straightforward and then answer the question. Okay. Okay. Another question can be, what is the moral economy of Gandhianism in Kantapura? We've discussed that a few minutes ago. You can talk about Anshuman Mondal and then his views and how the economy can be moral. You can talk about that. You can refer to the next page, the page 34. The answer is kind of in the middle of the page where Anshuman Mondal's views are written. Okay. Okay, that brings us to the end of unit 5. Okay, there are some other questions at the end of the book where you have your model examination questions or model question paper. You can go through that. If you have any questions, you can ask me in the next class or whenever you get a chance. We still have, I think, what, 14 more days, 10 more days, something of that sort, at least until the 23rd. You have time until that. So please go ahead, read the chapter, read all the units, and then come back. Okay. So that effectively brings us to the end of unit 5. Is everybody still on? And then is everybody still with me? Everybody awake? Okay, thank you, Sirisha. Let me, okay, so can we go ahead and then start our block 3, because we still have a solid half an hour left. So let us go ahead and then start the unit 3. Again, the structure of this block is similar to what block 1 does. Okay, they introduce you to the basic concepts. They introduce you. Okay, hold on. Sunaina, I'm not getting your message. Can you send it again? Okay, one sec. Let me unmute. Who is it? Okay, Samir, what's up? Samir, can you unmute yourself?
Yes, sir.
Yes, Samir. Did you have a question?
No, sir.
Okay, that's fine. Okay, and Sai Kiran. Sri Sai Kiran, you can unmute yourself. Your hand is raised, so I'm assuming you have a question.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes. Sir, as we all know, Malgudi-Days is a famous work, and it's a household name in India.
Right.
Malgudi-Days. Written, hello?
Yes, go on.
Hello? Hello?
Go on, Sai Kiran, we can hear you.
Sir, why are Rajarao's works are not as famous as R.K. Narayan's? And I mean, not famous in the sense they are not household.
Interesting. So yeah, I think you answered your own question. They are not famous. You initially said they're not famous, but they are famous, right? All three, the trio, right? The founding fathers, quote unquote, for Indian novels, Rajarao, Narayan, and Mulk Raj Anand. All their works are famous. Just that Malgudi Days is more famous because it also has an adaptation, right? It also has an adaptation, and then it was made into a serial, and then it's household because we all watched it as kids, and then we know it not just in the form of a collection of short stories, but we also know it in the form of a serial, right? We know Girish Karnad, we know that little boy Swami, and then we remember that, right? And then that typical music of Malgudi Days. So we are familiar with Malgudi Days more because it has been turned into more adaptations. No, Kantapura, if I remember, it also has an adaptation, but it's not very famous because it's not played around as frequently as Malgudi Days. Okay, but your question to answer your question directly, right? Yes, all three people's works are pretty famous.
Okay, sir. Thank you.
Right, and DV shares the same opinion. He says because they have not been televised, right? So Rajarao is not very. And then he says, okay, DV, let me just unmute you so you can speak. DV, go on.
Yes, so to answer Sai Kiran's question, like I said, the adaptation or the way things would reach you, the easier they reach you, the more fame they attain, or if there's a kind of an agenda by someone, some channel, some media, somewhere to popularize a specific work, a literary work, that's when they attain fame. For that matter of fact, there have been so many playwrights and dramatists in the time of Shakespeare, but he was the only one who received the king's patronage. So he is only regarded within history as the most famous playwright. But there have been more competent and accomplished dramatists who've done other dramas, who've created other things, but their names have not been in the limelight.
Yes. Sir, actually, I have a view on this. Can I?
Of course, yeah, please go on.
Actually, what I think is Malgudi Days revolves around childhood. Childhood. So every television channel, like every television channel, they aim for children. Specifically, they aim for children's attention. If I am not wrong, they aim for the children's attention. So they specifically revolve around the child named Swami. So if we see Kantapura right now, it revolves around Gandhi or something like that. So am I correct in my perspective?
Yes, that's one perspective. Again, there's no right or wrong answer for this, but that is one perspective. Yes, you're right. It talks about childhood, it talks about Swami, and then his mischievousness, and then how his life is in Malgudi and everything, right? So it's a perfect plot for an adaptation, especially when your audience is children. When your target audience is children, then Malgudi Days is much better adaptation, or much better plot than Kantapura, obviously, right?
Yes.
Because you cannot talk about complicated concepts of Gandhianism or whatever in an adaptation for children, right? It's not impossible, but it's going to be very difficult. But Swami and Friends, you can always talk about Swami's. So kids, like you said, kids who watch this particular series, they relate to Swami, right? Because all kids are mischievous at some point.
That at that time, cricket started gaining popularity in India post 1980.
Right. Yeah.
And they included some MCC, right? Malgudi Cricket Club.
Right. Yes.
It's related to Malibon Cricket Club, MCC. I'm not wrong in the ICC. So these are my views, sir. I don't know if I am right or wrong. These are my views on this.
Yes, good. Thanks for sharing them with us. Like I said, there's nothing that is a perfect answer or a right answer or a wrong answer. Literature, especially, right? When you analyze literature or when you talk about literature, we all have different perspectives, and that's the fun of literature. Right? There is no one meaning for literature. That is why we have these courses where we talk about these different perspectives. If you any book you take, right? You go and then you read the book, you will have one perspective. And if you take the same book to somebody else and then ask him or her to read it, they will have a completely different perspective on it.
Yeah.
Right. And then somebody else will have a completely different perspective. So thank you. Yeah, I mean, it's very interesting. And thank you for sharing your insights with us.
Thank you.
Makes sense. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Does anybody else have anything to add to what either Sai Kiran said or DV said or Samir has said? If nobody has anything, then we'll move on to Unit 10. Okay. Looks like nobody has anything else to add. Let's move on to Unit 10. Okay. Unit 10 is the Indian novel, 1950s to 1980s. It's again a short unit, and it's very specific to authors or writers who have written in these decades, 50s through the 80s. Now, the objective of this unit is to introduce the main themes and techniques of post-independence Indian novels. And like I said, this block is also structured in a similar way that block 1 is structured in. We will talk about the themes and techniques, the general themes and then the techniques that people have used in these decades. And then we will move on to the actual fiction. I think in this block, I think it's Rohinton Mystery's work that we are going to talk about. Yes. So we are going to talk about first the Indian novel 50s through 80s, and then we will talk about Indian women's fiction, which is a very, very interesting topic. And I'm sure that will be an interactive session. And then we will move on to Unit 12, which talks about the postmodern Indian novel. Okay. And again, this is a very loaded phrase, postmodern Indian novel. We'll have to understand what postmodernism is before we talk about postmodern Indian novel. But we'll get to it in a couple of days. And then we will talk about Unit 13, the novel of the Indian diaspora. So we will talk about some of the diasporic authors and then their works. And we will end the block with Rohinton Mysteries, A Fine Balance. So as you can see, like I said, it pretty much follows the same pattern of block 1. Okay, having said that, let me give a quick introduction to this unit. Now we've talked about the trio of Indian novels multiple times in the past 3 days, R.K. Narayan, Rajarao, and Mulk Rajanand. They started writing before independence. Right? Their careers began in the 30s, but they continue to write after Indian independence also. Now, along with these novelists, after independence, new writers came up. Now, some of the writers are Babani Bhattacharya, and then we've talked about Manohar Malgaonkar, I think, when we were talking about the partition literature a few days ago. We have Kamala Markandeya, who was writing at that time, Anita Desai. Later, we have Arun Joshi, Nayantara Sahgal, who wrote a lot about the political stuff. And then all these authors wrote a lot in the second half of the 20th century. Okay, but what's the difference? Now, independence gave rise to a quote unquote new India, right? Our concerns as Indians and even and concerns of the writers as pre-independent writers or pre-independence writers are different, or let me not call them completely different, but they overlap sometimes, but they are not the same as post-independence. We have a new, quote unquote, new India. We were not under the colonial rule anymore. So we have new concerns, or the writers had new concerns. This new India had, like I said, different problems than the old India of the pre-independence era. And the themes of writings after independence were, they're listed on your screen. One is political independence and how the new nation is going to work, and then this newly found independence, right? We've been fighting for independence for a long time, and we suddenly now have independence. Now, what do we do with this independence politically? So that was the concern that was major theme in the writings of the post-independence era. They also, again, they continue to talk about social problems like poverty, class, and caste. If you remember, this was also one of the concerns of the trio, right? Of Narayan, Rajarao, and Anand also. So that continued to be the major theme after independence also. And then they talked about the problem of development and modernization. Okay, now that Indians were not under the colonial rule, they were talking about the problems of development and modernization. Is remodernization really good for the country? Is it bad for the country? Those were the concerns. And then there's always the tension between the traditional and the modern, right? We even have it now. Actually, this is a theme in even contemporary writings, or from a India perspective, the rural areas versus the urban areas. Urban areas, the fast-paced, technologically advanced, modern societies versus the rural traditional societies which uphold the values, religious as well as social. There's always this tension between which is better, which is worse. And then that is again another theme that people were working on. Now, an interesting thing is Meenakshi Mukherjee. She says that the major issues facing the 20th century Indian novelists were involvement and concern. These are the two words that she uses: involvement and concern. Involvement with the changing scenario. Okay, because the scenario is changing very rapidly, politically and socially also. It's changing very rapidly after independence. And concern for the destiny of the country. Now, like I said, we got the independence, but what do we do with this independence, right? Somebody's got to take a decision. So what is the destiny of this country? Where is this country moving? So these are the major issues facing the 20th century Indian novelists. Now, having said that, putting a writer in a specific classification or be it by a particular time period or some labeling is usually problematic, as many of these writers' careers, like we talked about, span over decades. They started in 1930s, they wrote well into 1980s, and then they span over decades. And then this is again a rapidly changing time. So the themes that they work on are different in different works, right? So compartmentalizing them into a specific classification is usually problematic. Okay, they again, to use the previous phrase that I used, they break the barriers and they work across themes and then change with the changing times. But at a very high level, if you have to compartmentalize, not the authors, but then the works, right? We can say that the novels before independence had social realism as their focus, as we have already talked about. And modern novels after independence focused on more of experimentation, be it language or the themes. They experimented a lot. And then there is a contemporary Indian novel after 1980s or 1981, where experimentation and language limits were extended completely by Rushdie, so authors like Salman Rushdie, right? So they've experimented a lot. So that's the very high level compartmentalization if you really want to do it. Now there are also a few the interesting part of this particular time period that we are talking about, 1950s to 1980s, right, is there are a very few writers, first thing. And the second thing is within those where there are fewer women writers. And then within those, there are only a few women writers who are famous. We always fall back on the same names. We always look at the most famous authors. But there are a few writers, like, I don't know if you've heard about this person, Ruth Prawar Jabwala. She was an excellent writer, and her name is not mentioned in anywhere. And a lot of people don't know. And then they have not read their work, but there were a few writers who produced very good works, but they are just mentioned in the passing most of the time, but their works are nevertheless influential. Okay, anyway, going back to the 50s and 60s, right? Early writers of this time continued to use the realist form of writing. So they depicted the reality in their works. They didn't sugarcoat stuff. They tried not to sugarcoat stuff and then idealize or romanticize India and Indian society. They were still, though, grappling with the questions we discussed earlier. How could English be used to suit Indian realities, right? Indian reality, as we have discussed, is extremely specific to us. It's very unique. We are in a very unique situation. So we were, and we are still in a very unique situation. So our sensibilities are different from the rest of the world. So how could English be used to suit these Indian realities, these Indian sensibilities? and how to appeal to, first thing, Indian readers of these English writings, right? That is the time when Indian readers started reading English writings, and then how do we appeal to these Indian readers? So while the trio of Indian novels started to break away from this imitation of the Western form of novel, which was there in the previous decades and previous century, the writers after independence had modern tendencies. They had modern tendencies of experimentation. They experimented with form, they experimented with language, they experimented with technique and everything. We'll see about some of them in a few minutes. Now, let us look at one of the major theme of the post-independence writers. Okay, this is, I think, the second section in your book, but anyway, the social problems. Now, like we discussed, social problems were dealt with previous authors also, previous writers also, but social problems like caste, patriarchy, class, poverty, these are the things that we're talking about. Now, some of the works are listed on your screen that touch upon these problems. First is Bhabani Bhattacharya that we talked about. He wrote this this novel called So Many Hungers, which was published in 1948. This is a novel that deals with poverty in Bengal. It is set in a time where this Bengal famine happened in the 40s, right? So it was set in that time frame, and this novel talks about how the corruption and indifference of the Indian officials, administrative officials, was responsible for the starvation and death of many people. A lot of people died because of the Bengal famine, and this particular work touches upon that theme. And he also has this Who Rides a Tiger? He Who Rides a Tiger, I think, yeah, which was published in 1954. This is an interesting novel which deals with quote unquote untouchable boy, right? Again, going back to the caste social problem, with an untouchable boy. His name is Kalo, and who he masquerades as a Brahmin. He's actually an untouchable boy, but then he dresses himself up as a Brahmin, and is successful actually in fooling people. So it's a very interesting book. So this particular book talks about the social problem of the caste system. And Shadow from Ladakh, published in 1966. This one talks about the nationalism. It has nationalism as its theme, and also talks about the tensions between the industrialization versus its effects. What are the effects of industrialization? Now, it is set in the China-India conflict time of the early 60s, 1962, right? Where we had this conflict with China. So this is set in that time frame. So this is, again, it touches upon the nationalism and industrialization and those topics. Now, another quick note on Kamala Markandeya. As you can see, I've listed two of her works. Some Inner Fury, published in 1957, talks about nationalism. Nectar in a Sieve, published in 1954, talks about rural poverty. Okay. And then moving on to another theme, there were many books in the latter part of 20th century that dealt with tradition versus modernity. We talked about it. Tradition, again, typically in a rural backdrop, and modernity typically in a city backdrop. This theme takes various forms, like I said, Western traditions versus Indian traditions, and modern Indians versus traditional Indians and such. One of the works that dealt with this theme is Music for Mohini, which again was written by Bhabani Bhattacharya, where Mohini is his protagonist, where this girl is from city and then she's married into a rural conservative family. And the novel is about how the transition from this westernized woman to a traditional woman takes place, and how she handles this translation. So that's what this is about. In the interest of time, the section on page 76 talks about Kamala Markandeya's works, and you can go through it whenever you have time. It talks about how strong women characters mark Markandeya's fiction. Okay, her fiction has very strong women characters. Okay, we have nationalism and new nation. I will rush through this slide, but we will start tomorrow's class with this slide. Okay, we will talk, or the slide before this. We will have a recap of this because we are rushing, and we have 7 more minutes, and I want to give some time for the next speaker to join in. So anyway, another theme is nationalism and the new nation. We mentioned, I think I've mentioned this before. We mentioned Manohar Malgaonkar, his work A Bend in the Ganges, when we discussed the partition literature a couple of days ago, along with Khushwant Singh's Train to Pakistan. And this novel, basically, the bend in the Ganges, it talks about the conspiracy of the Britishers in raising the divide between Hindus and Muslims. Then there is Nayanthara Sehgal, whose works are kind of sort of political in a way. I don't know how many of you heard about Nayanthara Sehgal, but does anybody know who this person is? She's related to a very prominent Indian personality. Does anybody know? You can type it in the chat box. Does anybody know who Nayanthara Sehgal is? Who is she related to? Okay, so she's related to Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru. She is the niece of Jawaharlal Nehru. She's the daughter of his sister, Vijay Lakshmi Pandit. Okay. And then that's fine. We'll talk about answering questions from this unit in tomorrow's class. And yeah, let us take a pause here for today. But one last thing that I wanted to mention before I let you people go is I've been suggesting, or I've been encouraging you to read the suggested readings list also, which will give a holistic view of what these units are talking about. Now, due to the constraints of space, time, and the number of pages, a lot of things have to be said in a very little short description and then in a very few pages, right? Which is always not possible. So please take time to read the secondary literature that is given at the end of the unit suggested readings. And from my side, I think if somebody is interested in some supplementary material for knowing the history of Indian English literature, there is this book by M.K. Nayak. It is titled A History of Indian English Literature. Okay, I'll repeat that. The author is M.K. Nayak, M-K-N-A-I-K, and it's titled A History of Indian English Literature. This book is not specific to fiction or anything. It talks about poetry, it talks about novels, and also drama in a chronological way. So it's structured in a very good way. So this book might be useful to you in case you're interested. Again, if you have the time before your exams to go through this book quickly, or at least parts of this book, I'm sure it's going to have a lot of information for you to make your answers much more better. Okay, so let us take a pause here and continue in the next class. In the next class, we will discuss about Block 3, Unit 10. We will do a very quick run through the previous 2 slides. And then we will move on to Unit 11, which is Indian Women's Fiction. Okay. Now, thank you very much to everybody who has joined. I know it's, okay, how do I unmute you people? Okay, yeah, there. Yeah. So I know it's a Sunday, but thank you very much for spending your time with me this 1.5 hours. And thank you for your insights. Thank you for your answers. And if you have any questions, please feel free to jot them down. And then we'll be sure to discuss them in further units or further classes. Okay. Okay. Does anybody have any final comments for today? Or we can close this class and then let the next speaker join in.
No queries, sir. Thank you.
Okay, excellent. Okay, everybody, stay safe and yeah, see you all tomorrow again. Okay, bye.
Sir, thank you.
Thank you.
Good day, sir. Thank you.
Sir.
You too. Bye.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Okay, sir. See you next time.
Thank you, sir.
That was very cute. Who is that?